Welcome, everyone. Today, we're going to break down fundraising compliance in Washington, D.C. This is all part of our series where we try to make these complex rules a lot simpler for nonprofit leaders like you. And this guide is brought to you by the team at Ironwood Registrations. Okay, so let's get right into it. If your nonprofit is even thinking about asking for donations from folks in Washington, D.C., you're gonna want to listen up. You probably need to get compliant first. But here's the curveball. D.C. doesn't have a normal registration system. It's actually a licensing process, and believe me, that difference is everything. So, who's the one in charge here? Well, in D.C., it all goes through the Department of Licensing and Consumer Protection. You'll see it called DLCP. They're the agency that issues the specific license you'll need to fundraise legally in the district. And this is the magic ticket, the Charitable Solicitation Basic Business License, or as it's usually called, a BBL. Think of this as your official permission slip. It's the credential your organization has to get before you can legally ask for a single dollar in DC. Now for the million-dollar question. Who actually needs to get one of these? Well, the requirement is incredibly broad. And the most important part, you need to have this license before you even start asking for contributions. And here's where you can really see how wide DC casts its net. This isn't just about calling up DC residents and asking for money. A general fundraising campaign that just reaches the district, that can count. If you have a professional fundraiser doing work on your behalf, that's covered too. Even applying for certain grants can trigger this requirement. The definition of solicitation here is really, really broad. So, how do you actually get one? Let's walk through the initial steps for getting your BBL. It is a multi-step process, but it's totally manageable once you know the pathway. This really lays out the whole roadmap, and you gotta pay attention to the order. You can't just jump straight to the BBL application. Nope. First, you have to get registered with the Office of Tax and Revenue. Then, you need a registered agent who's physically in the district. If your nonprofit is based out of state, you'll also need what's called a Certificate of Authority. Only when all those dominoes have fallen can you finally submit the BBL application. So what's this initial license going to cost you? The fee for the BBL is $99. Pretty straightforward. We'll touch on the renewal fee in just a bit. Getting the license is really just the beginning. To keep fundraising legally in DC, you have to maintain it. So let's talk about how this fits into your ongoing compliance schedule. Once you have that license, how long is it actually good for? In DC, the license is valid for a 2-year period, so that 2-year cycle is a key date you'll want to get on your compliance calendar right away. The renewal itself is pretty simple. You'll pay another $99 fee and just confirm that your organization is still in compliance. But here's a really important point that makes DC different from a lot of other places. They do not require you to submit annual financial reports for this specific license renewal. For a lot of finance teams, that's a huge sigh of relief. Now, this is a detail you really have to remember. The district is very, very strict about its deadlines. There are no extensions for renewing your license. If you're late, you could be looking at some significant penalties, and that's a headache nobody needs. Okay, so does every single organization need a license? Not necessarily. There are a few exemptions, but they are quite specific. Let's take a look at who might qualify and some special rules that apply, especially for groups that aren't based in DC. So here are the main groups that might be exempt. You've got religious organizations and certain educational institutions. Membership groups that only ask for money from their own members might also be in the clear. And then there's a common exemption for small organizations, those that raise less than $25,000 a year. But, and this is a big but, all of their fundraising has to be done by unpaid volunteers. Okay, this next point is absolutely critical, so please listen closely. Even if you are 100% sure your organization qualifies for an exemption, you can't just assume you're exempt. In DC, you have to formally apply for that exemption status and wait for it to be granted. It is not automatic. And what if your nonprofit's office isn't physically in DC? Well, it doesn't matter. The trigger for this rule isn't where your office is located. It's where your donors are. If you solicit from DC residents, you're playing by their rules. That means out-of-state nonprofits also have to get that authority to do business and appoint a local registered agent. All right, let's pull all this together. Understanding these rules isn't just about checking a box on a form. It's really about protecting your organization's ability to fund its mission. And that takes some proactive and careful management. So what are the best practices here? First, you have to track that 2-year expiration date like a hawk. Second, make sure all your other registrations, like your tax and corporate status, are kept active. You'll also want to keep an eye out for any rule changes from the DLCP. And finally, if you decide to stop fundraising in DC, don't just let things lapse. You need to formally close out your obligations, or you could run into problems later. If you take away just one thing today, let it be this. Because DC uses this unique licensing model and defines solicitation so broadly, every single nonprofit that fundraises there needs to be on their toes, proactive, and really diligent about reviewing their compliance status. You know, at the end of the day, all of these rules exist to protect donors and make sure there's transparency in the sector. But managing all these complexities, especially if you're fundraising in a bunch of different states, can feel like a full-time job. And honestly, that's exactly why specialist firms like Ironwood Registrations exist, to handle this work for you so you can stay focused on your mission. You can definitely learn more about these requirements, or you can request help to make sure your nonprofit is totally compliant by visiting ironwoodregistrations.com.